My name is Sudhir Gajre. I'm a director of data services and cloud at DBBest Technologies. We actually write a lot of migration type tooling and do overall data platform work. So I was invited to kind of speak today on the topic of migrations. And I'm assuming that most of you probably are running some kind of competitive database, right? Either Oracle or Sybase or DB2 or even Access to that matter. And there is interest, or at least a desire to kind of learn how you could potentially migrate that over to SQL Server. So having said that, what the plan today is, let's kind of visit some of the reasons on why, when we talk to customers, they like to migrate over to SQL Server, right? I think it's kind of important to really understand some of the technical aspects, the business aspects, and how to make a pretty convincing case to your technical owners or business owners, business stakeholders on migration. Then we'll talk a little bit about the approach, the process, and the methodology involved in basically migrating SQL Server or migrating over to SQL Server. I will get into the migration tools and kind of show you guys a tool called SQL Server Migration Assistant. How many of you guys are familiar with SSMA or SQL Server Migration Assistant? Oh, wow. Not a whole lot, only 2 or 3 hands. So that's, in a way, that's a good thing. Hopefully, you'll find it useful. I'll show you guys a quick demo on how you can use the tool to kind of migrate over from a competitive database to SQL Server. We'll get into some customer case studies. If I don't know how much time we'll have, but I'll quickly go over that, some interesting references and stuff. We'll briefly look at database migration challenges, what we see out in the field when we work with customers when it comes to migrations. Obviously, talk about migration best practices. I'll kind of show you guys some references, and we'll call it a day. I'll head back to the airport, and you guys can enjoy lunch and the remaining of the sessions. Sounds good? Okay. So before we even kind of learn about the process, the methodology and the tools and all that kind of stuff, the fundamental question that comes up is most customers we talk to have multiple data platform environments. And I'm sure you guys are kind of similar, right? Obviously, Oracle and SQL Server are probably like the 2 most prominent environments over there, closely followed by DB2. Once in a while, we'll see MySQL. There's tons of Access kind of databases. And you have had those environments probably for years. The fundamental question then is, why do you want to take the trouble and the pain to then migrate from what is working and what is running and move to a SQL Server-like platform? And I have found in my experience when I talk to customers, there's 2 main reasons why customers do that, right? Or 2 reasons that actually at least make sense. One is along the business aspects, and the other one is along the technical or the architectural aspect, right? From a business perspective, it's kind of obvious that even now, even though the licensing of SQL Server got changed back in 2012, it's still a lower cost platform. And when we say lower cost, I'm going to use the word lower operational cost because that includes a variety of different things. It includes licensing cost, includes DBA resources, all that kind of stuff. The other most common thing we hear, and also depends on what platform you have, is the lack of developer and DBA talent for other platforms, right? Maybe for Oracle DB2, maybe for Oracle you can find people who can do the work. But for some other platforms, like I have a customer who has a lot of Informix, and their issue is really finding people who are willing to work on Informix and who have experience and stuff like that. So that's another challenge we see. And then the other thing is kind of just more of a consolidation type of reason to reduce or to eliminate non-SQL Server footprint, right? From a technical perspective or an architectural perspective, it becomes a pretty interesting discussion. The way I like to position it is think of migration not just as a literal code translation that you have system A running over here and you want to put it on system B, but think of it as a modernization type effort, right? Modernized architecture. When we talk to customers, I really don't even like to use the word migration. I much rather use the word modernization. I think that sounds a lot better. It makes a lot more sense. Because if all you're going to do is take one system and recode it into something else and spend a lot of money doing that, take a lot of risk doing that, even though your licensing cost may be lower, the other things that go along with it, which is the vision of modernization, makes sense. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about what I exactly mean by that. Consistency in architecture. That is another very, very important thing, right? I have heard, and I don't have any ways of verifying this, to be honest, that Southwest Airlines, the only model of airplane they have in their entire fleet is a 737. For a very good reason, because you train your pilots just on that one model. You train your mechanics and all your other stuff just on that one model. So it brings a lot of simplicity and consistency, which in itself is a huge benefit. Same thing with SQL Server-like platform as well. I've walked into customer environments where they have told me that you name a database, and we have it. Informix, SQL, DB2, Oracle, MySQL, Postgres, flat files, mainframe. We have a little bit of everything. And I don't necessarily believe that's something to be happy or proud about. All it means is you are tremendously increasing overhead. You have multiple teams who need to be trained on different things, doing from a support perspective, licensing contract perspective. So huge lot of reasons, right? Therefore, simplification and standardization makes a lot of sense. So let's make sure that we can get a good handle on these reasons, because before you even think of migrations, building out a solid business case from a cost and a technical or an architectural perspective is very, very important. And those are kind of the summary of what it should look like. And then I have put some interesting kind of comments here from some of the companies who actually did the migration over the last few years. We have been working with customers. There's a variety of different reasons why customers migrate, and there are different benefits a lot of customers see and a lot of them get. But the theme is consistent. It usually is around lower operational cost, performance, standardization of teams, stuff like that. Like AIM Healthcare in this case, they realized significant TCO savings. The other customer, it was all about better, faster, and cheaper for them. Licensing cost was another issue. And then obviously, improved development productivity and lower cost after migrating, right? So, that's another kind of important thing, that with SQL Server-like platform, especially with support from Visual Studio, SSDT, the whole development cycle is actually fairly simplified compared to the other platforms. And when you put all the tools together, SSIS, SSAS, Power BI, reporting services, it becomes a pretty compelling platform with centralized tooling and all that kind of stuff. So you guys probably already know that. Okay, now let's kind of get into, before I get into the technical aspects, or more so the tooling aspect, right? The SQL Server Migration Assistant, and I'll definitely spend some time on that. What I do want to talk to you first is the approach, the process, and the methodology. And I really like to emphasize this, especially if you want to be successful and consistent in your migration project. This is something very, very important. Think of a migration project as any other software development project, right? I'm sure many of you have been on different types of software development project, either as developers or DBAs or whatever. It's exactly the same approach. There is not much difference on how you would handle a migration project, right? Now, there are differences from some subtle steps on what you analyze, how you analyze, what you develop, what you change, and that's probably what I'll kind of go through in the next few slides. Anybody has any questions so far? If you have questions, either come to one of the mics or I can just repeat the question for you. Okay, so again, what does the approach look like, right? So I mean, obviously, the first step in the approach is to make the business and the technical architectural case. You need a business sponsor and or even a technical sponsor. So we talked about the various ways you can make the case, stuff like that. Then the next question that comes up is, what are you trying to migrate, right? And I'll use the word Oracle, or I'll give the example of Oracle over here, since that seems to be the most common platform we migrate off of, right? What I mean by that is this a one-off application migration, or is it an entire platform migration? So you may have literally hundreds or somewhere close to 100 apps running on Oracle. Or you may be in a situation where you're predominantly SQL Server, and you just have that one-off app which came in for whatever reason running on Oracle, right? Which side of the fence you fall in, you got to figure out. Now, if you have a very large investment in Oracle, a very large platform in Oracle, then you have to follow a certain process or a certain path, right? So basically, we recommend that you evaluate and assess, or at least take a look at the overall platform, right? If that's what your goal is. If your goal is to ultimately get off of Oracle in the next maybe 2, 3, 5 years, then you have to kind of slowly but surely start assessing, a few apps. Now, I've had customers who have literally had like hundreds of instances of Oracle. It's probably not practical to assess, and I'll talk a little bit about what I really mean by assess or assessment, and I'll show you what that assessment steps are and how to do it. It's probably not practical to go do all 100 instances. What we recommend in that situation then is to maybe take a few sample applications, maybe 2 or 3 simple, 2 or 3 medium complexity, and maybe 2 or 3 high complexity ones, which is a fairly good representative sample of the entire environment. Evaluate those, and then based on that, you can figure out the overall platform complexity. The reason I'm kind of mentioning this is because your management is going to ask you about risk, complexity, cost, estimates in terms of time and cost and all that kind of stuff, and you have to arrive at some reasonable number using some reasonable process or a methodology. So kind of going through that motion is important. And then pick a pilot app, and then obviously, pick an app kind of as a pilot project, go through that, migrate that, put it into SQL Server, put it into production, learn some lessons, learn some experiences, and then kind of repeat the process. So that's kind of the overall high-level approach, basically. Right? So specifically, let me kind of get into what the process would look like. Again, as I said, this is no different than any software development project, right? So the first step to do is to get into some scoping and planning exercise. Right? I don't know how many of you have heard about the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. It's also called as the MAPS tool. Well, maybe a few hands kind of go up. The reason I bring up this tool, or I mention this tool over here, is because you can use the MAP tool to go ahead and discover, obviously SQL Server and Oracle or DB2 instances as well. So this is kind of called the scoping and the planning exercise. So you first need to know, and maybe there might be some other way that you already know, and if you do, that's great. But if you don't, you have to inventory what is out there. I just want to put a plug-in for the MAP tool. It's a pretty good tool. It's a free download from the Microsoft website that you can use to go ahead and do that. After you're done with that, what is important to understand is the architectural requirements which exists today, right, for your, let's just say, for your Oracle environment. Let me give you some couple of specific examples over here. So for example, if Oracle is using DataGuard to create a redundant instance, a secondary instance or a replica or whatever you want to call it, right? Either they might be using it for high availability or they could be using it for disaster recovery. Or maybe you have RAC, Oracle RAC running, which maybe you guys are using from a high availability perspective, right? Maybe you're using Golden Gate, maybe some kind of replication, stuff like that. That would be an example of an architectural evaluation. Maybe this Oracle instance, once a month, at the end of the month, sends a output file to your external partner, right? So those are called as dependencies. What are some of the maintenance requirements that kind of go along with this application or with this portfolio of apps, right? Examples would be, say, maintenance window. How much are you allowed to basically take a downtime to maintain or to apply patches, stuff like that? High availability, is it 5 nines or what the deal there is? Same with HADR, all that kind of stuff. So to me, that is the initial scoping, planning, architectural evaluation kind of thing. And it's kind of very interesting that we have written the tool is out there to do the migration, it does a nice code translation, all that kind of stuff, which is great. However, there is lots of other things that are needed to run an application. ETL jobs, batch scripts, and especially if you're running Oracle on Unix or AIX, and then you're transferring that over to a Windows environment, all those things have to be kind of really considered, right? So I call that as the scoping and the planning phase. It's the architectural planning or the evaluation. Then comes the database migration phase, basically, right? So this is where we use the tool called SQL Server Migration Assistant, or SSMA, and I'm gonna walk you guys through that tool and show you a demo of how that tool looks like. Now that is a real lifesaver in a couple of different ways, and I'll kind of show that in the demo. But that's where one of the things I really like about that tool is you don't even have to migrate anything using that tool. It gives you the ability to evaluate your Oracle instance and do a high-level assessment. So it will actually go through all the Oracle code, the PL SQL code, and it will tell you how much is going to get migrated automatically. Is it 60%, 70%, 80%? What is left? What are the specific errors? And how much time it thinks it's going to take to fix those errors, right? So when you run the tool, and by the way, it can take quite a bit of time depending on how big your Oracle instance is to run the tool. So when you run the tool, you can evaluate, and you can really have a really good handle from a time perspective, technical complexity, specific errors. You can actually take the report and show it to a manager as to what the effort involved is from a migration perspective. So the complexity, effort, risk, all that kind of stuff can be evaluated using the tool. What the tool will also do for you is convert the schema over, right? So whatever you have in the Oracle schema. So basically you have a bunch of tables. The tables have columns, data types. You may have triggers. You may have stored procedures, functions, packages, all that kind of stuff. So the tool will make a best effort to automatically convert that from PL SQL into the T-SQL syntax. It can also help you with data migration, though data migration is a topic on its own. And there are a variety of different ways of doing data migration, such as SSIS or even through the tool. It just depends on how much data you have in Oracle. Embedded SQL statements. This becomes another very interesting thing. So let's just say you have an application sitting on Oracle. whatever. It could be a Java-based app, a Power Builder app, .NET app. In fact, I have a customer I'm working with on a Power Builder app sitting on Oracle. The application could potentially have some embedded SQL statements in it, right? So as part of a screen or as part of a query window or a table or report or whatever, it could be sending a SQL statement directly to the database. So it doesn't really have to be part of the database, such as a stored procedure or something. That becomes very interesting because you have to identify those. They are not part of the database. They're sitting in the application. You have to actually go through the application code and figure out what those statements are. And then you can literally take that statement, plug it into SSMA, and SSMA will show you or even translate it for you saying what's possible, what's not possible, right? So embedded SQL statements are interesting. If you don't have embedded SQL statements, but you have dynamic SQL statements, which are getting generated either in the app or in the database, that becomes another interesting challenge. Because they're dynamic. You don't know ahead of time what they are or what they look like. So in that case, then basically you have to study what generates the code, the dynamic code, and then you may have to make some changes to make it compatible with T-SQL. ETL and batch, that's another kind of very important thing where you have to figure out, if it's a database, it's pretty much sure that they have some kind of batch processes running or some kind of ETL running, most likely. You'll then have to kind of figure out what is the ETL written in. If it's something like, say, Informatica or DataStage or one of those external tools or even SSIS, you can keep the ETL as is and just make the relevant changes from Oracle to SQL Server, right? So that's definitely an approach over there. I have seen a lot of people, they think they're doing ETL. Well, in their mind they are doing ETL, but they don't use a tool to do ETL like SSIS or something. They have written scripts to do it. And the reason we see that quite a bit is most customers who want to migrate have a very, very old and legacy platform, like an Oracle app which was written 10, 15 years ago. At that time, maybe they didn't have a tool like Informatica or SSIS or whatever. So the bunch of developers got together and literally wrote the ETL as scripts. And they are now Unix scripts or shell scripts or something like that. So that becomes a very interesting kind of migration part, basically. So you'll have to migrate those over. Or, remember I talked about concept of modernization. You may have to tell the stakeholders that don't do a literal translation. Just redesign everything in SSIS. And there goes your scope. Now it becomes even a little bit more larger than you thought it would be. But maybe that's the right thing to do. Then system and database interfaces, right? As I said, you may have a web service call going in and sending data to a third-party vendor or something similar. So you may have to kind of consider those things as well. And then the last stage is the application deployment stage, right? And again, if you guys have been SQL Server DBAs for a while, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There are issues such as user login and permissions, right? Even when you move from SQL to SQL and you transfer from one instance or one server to another one, you have to worry about logins, which sit at the master database level, and users, which sit at the user database level. Now you're transferring from Oracle to SQL. So you will have to recreate all those logins, permissions, all that kind of stuff. And there's not a whole lot of automation over there. You'll have to script it out, figure out what those are, and then try to kind of run a script or try to kind of recreate. However, the bigger point is, the real question to be asked is, what is your security design, right? What's your security guidelines? In other words, if it's Oracle-based, SQL Server has the concept of Windows authentication, where you can simply use Windows groups and Active Directory groups and all that, which is kind of the more secure and the more, at least as far as I understand, the more recommended way to do authentication. Well, you may have to then redesign that part of security and login and authentication to make it more kind of appealing or conducive from a SQL Server perspective by using, say, Windows authentication as an example. And then last but not least, testing and performance tuning. Right? The first time things come over from Oracle to SQL, I have never seen them work or at least perform the way we expected them to, or the way we want them to, right? For a simple reason is, though both are relational databases, the indexing strategy, how you write code and all that kind of stuff is very, very different. How you lay out your data files, your log files, transaction logging, those mechanisms are very different. So what worked for Oracle is not necessarily going to work for SQL Server from a indexing and a performance tuning strategy perspective. In fact, I can confidently say it will not work. So you have to kind of redesign and create indexes which are appropriate for SQL Server. So to give you guys an example, the concept of a clustered index in SQL Server, right? A lot of people kind of think, I know I had this big conversation with the DBA many years ago, we were doing a migration and he kind of sat and argued with me saying that you don't need a clustered index in SQL Server because I don't have any IoT in Oracle. IoT is an indexed organized table. Now, conceptually, you may think that both are the same things, but they are not. They behave differently. The performance ramifications are very different. In SQL Server, having a clustered index and having an appropriate choice for the clustered index key is very, very important. If you mess up that strategy, your performance is going to go really down the tube, so to say. And I've had this discussion many times. As they bring something over from Oracle to SQL, don't go over a tuning exercise, bring the system up and see, I told you, it doesn't scale. There's no point in doing this. It's not going to scale. But the reality is you didn't really design it correctly. You didn't understand the indexing strategy. You didn't do correct performance tuning, right? So after you go through all of that, and please, that's the point I'm trying to make over here, is make sure you have enough time and hours and the appropriate resources, the level of expertise you would need to do something like this, allocated for that exercise. Okay, next few slides, I'm again going to talk a little bit about the process, and then what do we go up to noon, right? Okay, and then maybe in a little bit I'll probably switch to my demo. So one of the key things that, again, as I mentioned earlier, that I really don't like to use the word migration, but I use the word modernization. And here's some of the reasons that I'll kind of like to explain, right? And quite frankly, it also kind of depends on what situation you are in. If you have a 10 to 15-year-old application which is about to sunset, or there is no new functionality, it's an app which just needs to be running to support the business, but it's not that business critical, or no enhancements are being done, whatnot, maybe a literal code translation may make sense. Is take the system from as it exists, exactly recreate it in SQL Server, and we're fine. However, if it is an important app, mission-critical app, tier 1 app, and an app which was written many, many years ago in Oracle, I want to use the concept or the theme of modernization. In other words, as I'm going through the changes, and obviously 60-70% of the app will come in as is, right? All the business logic and the code and the stored procedures and all that, that will come in as is. But the question then becomes, do I want to leverage the new features and the new techniques and technologies from a SQL Server perspective, right? I don't know if you guys attended Sunil Agarwal's session on column store indexes or in memory, over the last few days. Those are some phenomenal features in SQL Server. right, from a performance perspective and whatnot, either in the data warehousing or for OLTP, it won't make a whole lot of sense if you just do a literal translation, especially for an important app, and you don't consider those types of features. I think you would really be kind of missing out on some critical functionality of SQL Server. Now, if you do have to do that, then depending on what feature it is, you may have to get into some redesign or even re-architecture, or it might be an easy change. But I would absolutely encourage you to evaluate that and make sure that you do all those changes. All right. The other example I want to point it out over here is I saw with a customer having huge Oracle legacy kind of application that there is a package, right? If you guys are familiar, any Oracle DBAs in the room, by the way? Oh, okay. There's a few hands that went up. Okay. So Oracle has the concept of packages, and Oracle will deploy and write packages for a whole variety of different things. That's why it kind of makes it a pretty powerful type of database system. So I saw a package called DBMS_REPL, I believe, if I remember correctly. So essentially what it is it's a package they wrote for replication. It will basically replicate data from one instance of Oracle to wherever. It was pretty big, thousands of lines of code. Now we could recode that and just do a literal translation into T-SQL and essentially create a whole bunch of stored procedures to write replication, to do nothing but replication. Or we could take a step back and say, let's just get rid of this code. Let's figure out what it is trying to do. At the end of the day, what it is trying to do is replication. And let's just use SQL Server replication, like transactional replication or whatever it is, or even always on availability group, depending on what the situation is. I saw another one for reporting. Essentially, it was a package written which would extract data from a bunch of tables and then format it using a HTML type conversion package into an HTML-based report, so then you can display it on a web browser. Now, we can write code and spend lots of time and money recreating that in SQL Server, or we could simply say, forget about that, let's just use SSRS, right? That being reporting services. So those are some of the architectural decisions you have to do during the migration process, and you absolutely should have people who understand the SQL Server architecture and platform very well to make those recommendations. Right? So in other words, where I'm going with this is you want to set the vision of a modernized architecture as opposed to let's just take the system and put it on SQL, so we'll save a lot of cost. I mean, that does matter, but the vision of a modernized architecture, especially with SQL 2016 coming out, and I'm sure you guys have heard about some of the new features in that, makes it very, very compelling. Okay, let me touch a little bit on migration of on-prem Oracle databases straight to the Azure SQL Database Service. Are you guys generally familiar with the Azure SQL Database Service? Have you guys kind of looked into that? Okay. So basically what that is it's not essentially the SQL Server that you install on-prem. You download or you get a DVD or whatever, and you install it on a physical server or a VM, or you do the same thing on Azure as a VM. It's not that. It's a platform as a service offering, right? It's basically a service, a relational database service, which is very close or very similar to SQL Server. And a lot of times we get into discussions where if you truly want to modernize and also move to the cloud, you can do that. You can convert Oracle over, and I'll show you that in my demo briefly, to Azure SQL Database Service. So the migration tool, which I'm going to demo here shortly, basically does that. It can take Oracle and convert it directly into the Azure PaaS syntax. And the reason the syntax is slightly different. In other words, there are some features not supported, although with the Azure V12 release, the gap is narrowing very, very fast. So what we have done is, as part of the SQL Server Migration Assistant tool, we actually have written something called as an extension pack. The concept behind an extension pack is pretty simple. Oracle has like umpteen number of functions, system functions for whatever, string manipulation or date, stuff like that, which are not present or not directly equivalent in SQL Server. So what we have done is we have created an extension pack where we have kind of recoded all those functionality just using UDFs and those types of functions, and we have added that as an extra schema. I believe it is called as an SSMA schema. So you install that schema. So when you use the tool will install that schema on the target server. So now anytime it sees an Oracle call, which is not available in SQL Server, it will default to SSMA and get that call from there, basically. So we have done that, and we have done that for Azure SQL Database Service as well. And not only that, the SSMA tool can then flag the code that is not compatible. I mean, there could still be some situations where there is some code which will work on SQL Server on-prem, but it might not work on Azure Azure SQL Database Service. And if that happens, the tool is smart enough to raise a red flag. You can look at it and then do some changes or whatever needs to be done. Okay, so let me kind of briefly cover the migration assessment methodology and the different steps kind of involved. The goal is to really assess and evaluate as much as possible, ahead of time. So you really have an idea, right? I mean, that's kind of the framework we really can advocate to our customers, is to ahead of time do all this work. So before you even get into the project, you know exactly what it is going to be, and how to build a business case and the application map and risk map and all that kind of stuff. So a migration project, we typically kind of like to divide it into three broad categories. I talked about the assessment phase quite a bit, then the actual migration phase, and the deployment phase, right? So what we cover in the assessment phase is the database conversion assessment, and that's the demo I'm gonna give you guys. Then the application assessment, I talked about that briefly, where you go through the application, you evaluate if there's any embedded calls. Another example is once we came around a library the application was using to connect to Oracle. It was using like an OCI call interface, if you guys are familiar with that. And then you may have to change that over to ODBC or a SQL.NET native client driver, something like that. The third-party solutions assessment, that is very important, right? Most of the time, applications don't live and function in isolation. They talk to each other, there's data being exchanged, there's bad jobs. There could be third-party apps which could be basically extracting data and sending it over to a vendor, partner, whatnot, right? Then the hardware requirements. What kind of box is it running on currently in your Oracle environment, and what would be the target architecture in a SQL Server environment? How many cores, how much memory, stuff like that. Not only that, basically, it also includes high availability requirements. Do you need to put this on an always-on cluster? Things of that nature. And then the ROI calculations that go with it, right? At the end of the day, you have to prove out the ROI. The migration phase consists of a bunch of steps as well, right? It is the actual database migration. And what we mean by database migration, or what I mean by database migration in this step, is really the database schema and the database code. So all your PL SQL code, your PL SQL schema, things of that nature. Then the application conversion, the third-party integration, then the data migration. The data migration itself is a very interesting kind of thing that you have to focus on. I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. Let's just say you have an Oracle database which has, say, 100 gigs in it, right? So fairly small. And you do all the code translation, the code migration, the code changes and everything, and then you migrate the data over. Now, to transfer 100 gigs, you can use SSMA, or you can use SSIS, and you can get it done, I don't know, maybe in a couple of hours or something, right? So you can essentially come over on a weekend, do all the migration, including the data migration, and Monday morning you're up and running on SQL Server. What if you have a 5 terabyte database in Oracle, right? And we have seen those. It's not uncommon. In that case, then, you will have to figure out what your data migration strategy is. There's 2 or 3 different ways you can do it. One way you can do it is you can tell your management that on Friday evening at 5 o'clock, we are going to shut down our Oracle instance, so the whole system goes down. And then we are going to start the data migration. This is assuming that all the schema and the table structures and everything are created on SQL Server. The code is migrated. I'm talking purely data migration. And then we are going to start our data migration. And you can do 5 terabyte migration using SSIS, but we would probably recommend creating, using SSMA, but we would probably recommend creating SSIS packages, and then let it run for 2-3 days, whatever it takes, to transfer 5 terabytes from one system to the other, right? It could take quite a bit of time because it's very large and it's going to take what it takes. That's one way of doing it. You will have to take maybe a 2-3 day downtime. Is that okay? Can you do it? I don't know. It totally depends on the app and totally depends on your SLAs, whatnot, right? If you cannot do it, and let's just say your manager comes in and tells you, no way, there's no way we can have the app down for that long. You only have 4 hours. What are you going to do now? So then what you have to do is, maybe the weekend before, you come in and do the data migration, and then during the week, you have to figure out some mechanism to capture all the deltas. So then on the weekend of the cutover, all you do is basically just move the deltas between the last few days or between the last 1 week, which will hopefully be a very, very small footprint compared to the rest of the database, right? So there's some techniques over there. And then the last phase of that is the deployment phase, where obviously in deployment you have to do a lot of testing, performance tuning, cutover go live, post-production activities, and stuff like that. Depending on what your maturity level is in SQL Server, you may have to learn a lot of the maintenance and the management task and all that kind of fun stuff. So here's what the risk map looks like. We recommend, and again, this is for a very large migration, right? So we recommend creating a risk map so you know which apps to migrate first. Again, over here, I'm just kind of going through the methodology. Over here, for one customer, we created this kind of basically a chart to help the management understand what to migrate, how to migrate, in what sequence to migrate. So I have all their apps over there. On the x-axis, I have the migration complexity. On the y-axis, I have the risk. And the size of the bubble shows the effort. So I presented this to the management, and I said, based on this, let's migrate the lower left-hand quadrant first. That's the low-hanging fruit, low risk, stuff like that. Here is a quick chart of what the migration project steps look like. And as you see from over here, we are spending a lot of time in the database and the application conversion. Doesn't surprise me, right? Database schema conversion, because what happens is not everything will get converted. There could be some manual intervention required, all that kind of stuff, and then functional testing and performance tuning. Now, in this case, we got really lucky. It's only about 2% performance testing. I don't believe that. It'll be quite a bit larger than that. So with that, let me jump to a demo. I am sure you guys are eager to see a demo. So let me do this. Okay. So the first step to do over here is obviously to then download the SQL Server Migration Assistant. So if you just go on Bing or Google or whatever your favorite search engine is and type SQL Server Migration Assistant, links will come up where you can download that, right? So, and by the way, there are various different engines for that. There is a SQL Server Migration Assistant for Oracle, for Sybase, for DB2, for Access. So make sure you get the right one. from a source platform perspective. So I have the Oracle SQL Server Migration Assistant over here. And that is what it kind of looks like, right? Very simple, kind of clean interface. Hope you guys can see that okay. Just a usual Windows-style interface, file, edit, view, tools, tester, help functionality, stuff like that. So the first thing you do is you do a file and you do a new. Okay? Now, when this dialog comes up, what it is asking you is basically a location, a name for the project. You can go ahead and call it whatever you want. A location on where you want to store all the project files. However, this is the important thing over here. Migrate to. What do you want to migrate to? If I drop down on this, and I don't know if you guys can see that well. I think you can. You have a whole bunch of options. Notice the very first option, right? It's the SQL Azure Database Service. That's the PaaS service. Then you can even migrate to 2005. I don't know why anybody would want to do that when it's going to run out of support here soon. 2008, 2012, 2014. And as new releases of SQL Server will get RTM'd, when 2016 comes out, we'll work with Microsoft and then upgrade this hopefully to the 2016 version, so on and so forth, right? So you basically pick that, and then you click OK. And now, over here at the top, you see you have a few options. You can now go ahead and create or connect to connect to Oracle. So this is going to be your source. So now you'll just kind of click on that, and you'll see all the familiar Oracle kind of things. And by the way, I have to remind you, when you download this tool on your local machine, you also need the Oracle drivers because it needs those to connect back to your Oracle instance. So for that, you can download it. I just downloaded it from the Oracle website, basically. So that'll give you will need those drivers. So once you get the drivers from the Oracle website, this tool will work, right? The Oracle client, basically. I put the Oracle client on this machine, and that bought the drivers for me. Okay, and then these are all the Oracle-specific parameters. I think the Oracle DBAs in the room will probably understand this better than I do. I'm going to cancel it, and then you can connect to SQL Azure. Now, I picked Azure as my target platform just to kind of show you guys something fun. You can pick just traditional SQL Server as well, and then it will ask you all the interesting things about Azure, the connection server name, and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I am going to quickly open up a project I connected to earlier. And after all the connections are made, this is what it will look like. Okay? Now, at the top left is my Oracle server, and it's called the Oracle Metadata Explorer. So it will show me all the metadata that it went ahead and retrieved from my Oracle database. And then at the bottom over here, it will show me all my Azure metadata, basically, right? So, and this is a project that I already created and ran, so that's why you're gonna see it that way. But basically now you're connected to Oracle. It will bring everything down for you. Okay, some interesting things over here is a tester. Now, maybe I picked a wrong example, but the tester is disabled right now because the functionality is not available in Azure. But let's just say you had picked traditional SQL Server. There's a tester functionality that we have built into the tool. What the tester functionality does is, after you copy the schema, after you copy the data, it has the ability to test and make sure that it's all the same and they all match up and stuff like that. So some basic unit level testing can be done through this tool, right? So now that everything is connected, now the first step would be this, is to go ahead and create a report, right? So now I have a bunch of Oracle schemas over here, as you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the schema, and a whole bunch of options kind of pop up, if you can see hopefully clear on the screen, such as a create report option, right? This is what I call as the assessment phase. So when you do a create report, it's actually not migrating anything over for you. All it is doing is it's going over your Oracle code, your schema and your data and everything in Oracle, and it will just go ahead and produce a report, and I'll show you what that report looks like. The other option is to convert the schema, which is basically if you do want to go ahead and get the conversion done, you can click on that and it will convert the schema. Refresh from database, that is if your DBA goes and adds a new column or a new table behind the scenes, if you click refresh, it will show over here. Migrate data, it will actually migrate the data then over from source to destination, and then some other stuff, right? So let me just go ahead and click on create report, or assume I clicked on create report, and when I do that, it produces a whole bunch of things in the directory where you created this project. The report you want to look for is called mainindex.html. And I think we have documented this in the help file, mainindex.html. So I double click on that, and when I double click, this is what the report kind of looks like basically. Let me go ahead and increase this a little bit and zoom in to probably 150%. I don't know if that makes any difference. Okay. So when you open up this report, at the main screen over here, there is some conversion statistics. Okay, now this is you have just ran the report. You haven't done any migration. This is very, very important, right? The reason it is important is it tells you right away how much can be automatically converted, right? So you can basically convert, in this specific case, about 82%. So roughly about 80% of your Oracle code, schema, syntax, whatnot, can get automatically converted by SSMA, right? Which is pretty good actually. I mean, 80% is not bad. And then at the bottom over here, if you see, it says total estimated manual conversion time. So then, depending on the complexity, we have built in almost like a rules type engine over there to evaluate how complex the statement is, which it cannot convert automatically, and what do we estimate the manual conversion effort to be, right? Now again, in all honesty, it's not a perfect science. So when you actually do the project, is it going to be 442.3 hours for you? Probably not, but that will give you a general ballpark, right? So you have not even touched a line of code. You have not migrated anything. You have just run the SSMA tool. You have done the evaluate, whatever that option is, the run report, and it ran the report, evaluated. And this now helps you create a foundation for a discussion or for some planning or for some estimation, budgeting, whatnot, to figure out what is the complexity and nature of the beast of this project. Very, very important thing, right? I kind of really like this as a step before you even do that, right? Now let's kind of study this report a little bit, right? So that's the important thing. Now, if you scroll down over here, it really gives very, very detailed level information. Like, for example, case statements, how many case statements you have and how many it can migrate over. Create statements, exception declarations, exit statements, foreign keys. It kind of goes into some procedures, unparsed, update statements, whatnot. So it kind of goes into some very detailed level type of analysis for you, right? Then what I can do is, at the bottom over here as well, it kind of lists me all my errors, which it saw. And basically what an error is it sees an Oracle statement which it cannot automatically convert over. And that's what it defines as an error. So at the bottom over here, and if you can see, it says about 405 errors. It will list all those errors, and you can actually double click and you can look at what it is. So over here it says that unsupported SQL clause, estimated manual conversion time is 4 hours, roughly speaking. So it was some kind of unsupported thing which just doesn't exist in SQL Server. So you have to look at it and figure out how you're going to recreate that functionality. On the left over here, if I click on book user, by the way, is the name of my schema. And now it kind of gives me a breakdown by all the different objects in the schema, such as functions, materialized views, packages, procedures, sequences, tables, views, all that kind of stuff, right? So if I maybe say click down on procedures, and if I go down to maybe SP underscore SP, here is a good example I saw somewhere in the morning. There you go, SP underscore update item. So it has got a red X on it, meaning there is some problem with it. So if I click on that, it now comes in and shows me two windows. One is my source, which is Oracle, and the other one is target, which is SQL Server. And it says over here, right, this is SSMA warning messages. Conversion from numeric data type can cause data loss. So depending on what data type you're using, let me show you guys some other examples over here. Okay, there you go. This is an interesting example. SSMA error message, 02SS0495. The following SQL statement was converted successfully, but is not supported by SQL Azure platform. So in other words, it was able to migrate it over. It will run on SQL Server, but in this case, it will not run on SQL Azure. Now again, by the way, Microsoft just released V12 of SQL Azure. So a lot of these errors will now go away because now the feature compatibility in the T-SQL surface area is pretty much almost there. They're pretty much compatible now. So a lot of these might not be valid anymore. But just to show you an example that it is smart about knowing that you're on Azure, and if you had chosen your destination as SQL Server, it will accordingly show you kind of the SQL Server specific things as well. So if I kind of go down, I'm just going to randomly pick something, source data type not recognized over here. And if I click on that, it shows exactly to me over here which data type it is complaining about. So over here, there's a data type called which type in any type, right? So any type is a user-defined data type. And probably you may have to now recreate that in SQL Server manually, so then the rest of the package or rest of the stored procedure works, right? So this is what I just demoed to you guys is the report that SSMA basically has produced as a result of running application or running SSMA on it. Now, if I go back to my main tool, I'm now at the tool basically, right? And now, if I'm interested in a schema, I can basically click on that schema and I can do a right click, and I can convert the entire schema over, or I can create a report, which is what I just showed you guys, or I can drill down into the schema. And then I can look at each function level. I can go ahead and convert this one function, and this is what it will look like if I convert it over. There you go. So when I convert this function over, account balance is the function, right? Create or replace function account balance. So at the top is Oracle, and at the bottom is basically SQL Server. It converted it completely clean. So no errors, nothing. Looks like there's direct equivalent available. So it does, return is, so it will convert that into return as from a SQL Server perspective, begin, declare, and then exactly the way the syntax should look like. Now, if you are familiar with Oracle, if you want to run a select statement and if you want to populate a variable, this is how Oracle does that, select into blah, blah, blah. In SQL Server, though, we do it slightly differently. So it went and declared a variable over here called L_balance. It's a float. And then it did a select L_balance equals accounts.balance, and then kind of went from did kind of SQL Server type thing. So if you kind of closely observe, it's definitely smart enough to figure out and to make the necessary changes into the Oracle or into the SQL Server T-SQL specific syntax basically. And I can show you guys a few more examples as well. In fact, let me show you guys an example of a procedure over here, which was the earlier one, SP_update item. Okay, down over here. And in this case, I got some errors. So something didn't go right. So it didn't convert the whole thing. It created a shell for you. And then somewhere down over here, it will actually flag the error messages. So these are all the error messages. Oops, I lost it. Let me go down. OK, Oracle substring function and SQL Server substring function may give a different result. So that's just a warning. The error message is SQL statement was converted, but is not supported on Azure in this case. So it does a pretty good job. And then, again, all I'm showing you guys is the code conversion. It has the ability to migrate the data as well, right? And when you migrate the data, at times that can be challenging as well because of data type issues and all that kind of stuff. So it's got some smarts built in to migrate the different data types correctly and all that kind of stuff, basically. So that's that. Any questions? And by the way, there's the way SQL does parameters. The parameters are kind of defined over here. The way Oracle does parameters, they're kind of defined. So you can look at what data types it is using and what equivalent data types it found. Over here, they're using number in Oracle. It decided to use float 53 based on the precision it saw. Varchar 2 in Oracle, Varchar max in SQL Server, type mapping. So source to target mapping, basically. And you can edit this. So you can have, if you want to have some specific data types mapped the way you think is best for your system, you can do that through over here. You can look at some properties, and then this is basically a report as opposed to the actual code window at that point in time. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the general demo of the tool, the ability to generate the report, ability to do some basic testing, convert or migrate data over, things of that nature, basically. Any questions, comments from the demo or the SSMA tool point of view?
On the SSMA tool, you mentioned about the Oracle application potentially making calls that are not in the database.
Right.
How does the SSMA tool find that, or do you have to go and look for instances on your own?
Right. So let me repeat the question. The question is, if you have an application with embedded Oracle statements, can the tool find it automatically, or do you have to have some manual process to kind of go look at that? So the answer is, no, the tool cannot find those things automatically at an application level. It can find all those things when it connects to a database instance. But if it sits outside the database instance, so what we do is we can basically take the application source code and we write some tools to scan through it to figure out where the Oracle statements are sitting, basically. So we can automate that. It's not done through the tool, but we can write scripts or whatnot to automate that process. We extract those statements. And once you extract the statement, what you can actually do is you can, in fact, paste that statement up on the top query window and do a quick convert, and it will show you what the equivalent will kind of look like at the bottom query window, basically. So, good question. Yeah.
Does the conversion tool use a dictionary file of some sort? And if so, is that dictionary file available?
So the question is, does the conversion tool use a dictionary file? And if it does, is it available? Well, let me clarify what you mean by that. So, dictionary in what sense?
Dictionary, as in there are functions within Oracle that are not supported within SQL, for instance.
Correct.
And that dictionary file would map those functions to potentially supported functions or flag it as not supported. So the idea would be that we could write an application ourselves, as you were just talking about, and rather than redeveloping all of those list of functions and the mappings, we could just reference the same database file, the dictionary file that's used here.
Right. So we sort of kind of do. Now, again, there's like umpteen number of parameters you can adjust in SSMA in the configuration files. I don't remember, quite honestly, if one of these things is there or not. But what we do is we have written ahead of time a library of functions, which we know don't exist in SQL, but exist in Oracle. And as soon as the tool sees that function, it will automatically go ahead and map it over to SSMA basically. All right, any other questions? So, okay, very good. So let me kind of switch back to my deck over here. All right, so let me kind of start with this slide. Okay, so we just saw a demo of the SQL Server Migration Assistant. Essentially what it does is, since we bring automation to the migration effort from wherever, Oracle DB to Sybase, MySQL, whatnot, it really automates, simplifies, reduces cost, reduces time, right? If you had to do this manually, forget about it, right? It's going to take a long time. So we saw the migration analyzer. I showed you what the report of the analyzer looks like. It will go ahead and assess all the migration complexity, tell you what can be migrated, what cannot be migrated. Then we saw the schema converter. This is where it will actually convert the schema and thus the business logic in it. There's a data migrator in it, and I briefly talked about the data migration piece. You can use the tool, you can use SSIS. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. And then there is also the migration tester, which will validate to some extent the converted database code basically. Okay, now having said that, obviously 100% cannot get mapped or cannot get translated over, right? So there's definitely always some challenges involved. And this is an example of Oracle, right? So there are some direct equivalency between Oracle and SQL Server. I mean, at the end of the day, both are relational database systems. So they're not going to be that different, but still they're different. So they have tables, views, data types, procedures, user-defined functions. We have all of that. Oracle has something called as packages. We don't have the concept of a package. So basically, package is a higher level unit of encapsulation. It's a logical type container with multiple procedures in it. They have sequences, triggers. We have that now as well. Then we try to emulate the system functions and find the equivalent in SQL. Or there's a schema called, I think we create a schema called sysdb schema, where all those are sitting, which are equivalent, which SSMA has created. And then we create some kind of emulation layer basically to add all that extra functionality, which could be missing or which could be different in SQL Server. Okay, having said that, I already did the demo. We actually don't have a whole lot of time left, so what I will do is let me skip and go to some of the migration challenges that we see. You might find that a little bit interesting. Okay, so typically what we see when we go on these migration projects, right, where we see some of the issues, is the first thing is you have to have enough sponsorship, because this is, it's absolutely an effort which is worthwhile and there's tons of benefits in migrating, but you got to have good management support and buy-in, right? You have to build a business case, you have to build a technical case. If you need to build the technical case, it doesn't cost you anything. The effort is not much to download SSMA, connect it to your test or dev Oracle instance, and let it generate the report, right? So that's actually not that high. So that will, armed with that report, it will help you have the right discussion. The other thing which we see quite a bit is legacy code written over many years. So I have a customer we're working with right now. This was a system developed in Oracle probably 10, 15 years ago, something like that, even more. And they have literally tens of thousands of lines of Oracle code. Now the problem is they just don't know what's really being used, what's being called. Maybe somebody wrote a package and it's still sitting there and they have no idea. So they believe that out of the tens of thousands of lines of Oracle we are seeing, only about 60% or so is really being used. So that you will see quite a bit. Some may be used, some may not be used. Classification and categorization of, if you can figure out a way through Oracle to identify what's being called, how often, and then classify and categorize it, then we can just migrate that over basically. Again, I talked about a code translation versus a redesign. And by redesign, I mean like a re-architecture. And what happens with that is if you start going down the path of re-architecture, maybe new functionality requirements may start coming in the application that, oh, while you're doing that, the users were really asking for this one extra module which has these 3 screens. Can we also build that in? And there's no right answer to that. It's basically, yeah, if you have time and budget, sure, you can build it in, or if the scope is just to get this converted over, then that could be a different answer. Testing methodology and tools. This is where we see a lot of people trip over, is they don't have the right tools, they don't have the right methodology to do testing, and you don't want to put this in production unless you have absolutely thoroughly tested it. And what I mean by testing is stress or performance testing as well, right? Because you may have a SQL Server screen which will work when you have 5 users on the system and may behave differently on Monday morning when there's 2,000 users on the system. And how do you find that? You have to figure out some kind of stress testing methodology. Post-production care and feed. Right? If SQL is something that is new to you guys, or you don't have that level of maturity with SQL Server in terms of handling tier 1 applications and mission critical apps and high availability and all that kind of stuff, then obviously you'll kind of get into the create a capable team to support and maintain basically. Very quick summarization of best practices. Customize the SSMA project settings, kind of some of the questions that were asked before. There's a lot of configuration options. You have to make sure that you set those correctly. Testing and validation. Allocate about 30% of project effort for testing and validation, very important. Application conversion as well, that being look for embedded SQL statements spread across the application code. And then optimize infrastructure, people, and process. So make sure that you are really ready in all aspects to handle a new system running on SQL Server. So there's a bunch of resources available. There is the SSMA download site. Again, there's different SSMAs out there for Oracle, DB2, Sybase, whatnot, so make sure you get the right one. There's some Microsoft production support as well. There's the SSMA blog, which we maintain and keep updated pretty regularly, and there is a TechNet discussion forum. So actually, we write this tool for Microsoft. Just a little bit about us over there. And thank you very much. If you guys have any more questions, please let me know.